Social media is full of disinformation to address your agenda. The algorithms send just what you want to hear right to you.
Like tens of millions of Americans, 71-year-old Jim Sells saw misinformation like this on social media, all over Facebook. As a result, the retired pilot and former marathon runner decided not to get vaccinated.
They constantly repeat the high survival rate. Out of 100 people that COVID affects, the vast majority can stay home and take an aspirin.
What do people think the survival rate is?
What they post is like 98.5 to 99.
If it's a 99% survival rate, that means 1 out of 100 people who get it die.
Yes.
If you apply that to the country, that means nearly 4 million people will die. And then there's another group who will say, well, hang on, so I'm 99% good, right? What's the big deal?
Right.
But COVID isn't just about life and death. It's also about damage to the body.
I tested positive for COVID. 2 days later, I was talking to a friend and really exhausted. And she recommended that I go to the hospital and get a breathing treatment. So Lisa drove me to the hospital. They wouldn't let her in.
I didn't get any sleep that night worrying about him. I did a lot of praying. Anytime you tried to call the hospital to get to the emergency room, they would ask where he is, and he's in ER, and they're working on him. And so I had no information.
Mr. Sells is a gentleman who presented to our emergency department after about 10 days of fairly typical symptoms for COVID-19 pneumonia. He had had a cough and increasing shortness of breath. He immediately required a high-flow oxygen to help keep his oxygen levels in the healthy range.
Dr. Arvind Panambalam is a pulmonologist at Piedmont Fayette Hospital in a suburb of Atlanta. By his own account, he has now seen hundreds of COVID-19 patients throughout the pandemic, like Jim Sells.
To avoid undue stress on his heart, on his brain, on other vital organs, on a cellular level, it took 5 times more oxygen for us to get him to just where it was safe.
They put a mask, an oxygen mask on, cinched it down real tight, started putting the heart monitors on me, and then asked me if I wanted to be resuscitated. And I'm in total shock. And then she said, I don't know if we can help you, but we're going to do all we can.
Did they spend time telling you what this virus was doing to your body or explaining what exactly was happening?
They showed me the chest x-ray, and the pulmonary doctor said, look, it's supposed to look like 2 black panels. And what I'm looking at is 2 white sheets.
So this is a CAT scan of Mr. Sells' chest. And as we scroll down, this is the very top parts of his lungs. You can already see effects of COVID pneumonia, mostly on his left lung here. But as we move down to the middle and lower lobes, especially of the right lung, you see some very diffuse opacification and involvement of COVID pneumonia.
When someone like Jim becomes infected with COVID, the virus can trigger lots of inflammation, making it harder to breathe. And sometimes that can scar the tissue and stiffen the lungs.
It's the lack of oxygen and its toll it takes on the rest of your organs.
About 15% of all hospitalized COVID patients experience some sort of kidney damage, many of them needing dialysis. Like Jim, 43-year-old Travis Campbell also wasn't vaccinated. The noise of social media was overwhelming. In the fairly rural part of Virginia where he lived, COVID just didn't seem urgent. But after 3 days of being extremely fatigued and having difficulty breathing, Travis was admitted to the hospital.
You're in a fog. Just nothing makes sense.
Travis's wife and 2 of his kids had also become sick with COVID. But while they got better at home, he got worse, keeping his family and friends updated on Facebook.
COVID starts doing blood clotting, and with the pneumonia start clotting too. So they've been fighting that. It's tough when your oxygen drops because you can't breathe. So you start having panic attacks.
One analysis of several studies found that between 20 to 30% of all critically ill patients will develop blood clots, like Travis did, potentially causing heart attacks and strokes. Some experts now argue that COVID is probably more of a vascular disease than a respiratory one because of its impact on the blood vessels that line so many of our organs. Things became so serious that Travis wrestled with his own mortality.
Last night I come to the realization that the chances of me not being able to give my daughter away at her wedding was greater than walking out.
Jim was hospitalized for 16 days, and nearly 11 weeks later, he's still trying to regain his strength.
I'm moving along. I'm about 40% now after 2 months. What I lack is duration, stamina, and I don't do anything strenuous because that'll send my oxygen way too low right away. I don't want anybody to go through what I went through. We really need the world to know the truth and the consequences of not being vaccinated.
You're obviously talking about this. Is this going to affect your social sort of interactions with people? Are you going to lose friends over this?
Oh, I already have.
So you get sick, you go to the hospital, you
Yep.
almost die, and you're losing friends over this?
Yeah, yeah.
Travis has also since left the hospital. But like nearly 1 in 20 unvaccinated people diagnosed with COVID-19, he is still experiencing many of the symptoms at least 2 months after his diagnosis.
The fog, the real confusion, it's every day. Very forgetful, headaches, still on oxygen, struggling to breathe there. It's just been one thing after another.
But unlike before he went into the hospital, he is now part of the at least 80% of American adults who've gotten at least one shot.
That shot could have prevented all of this. 4 weeks in ICU, just stop off at your local pharmacy. Vaccine's free. Nothing political about it. Check in, get it done.